they're not getting journalism.
The media bias, I guess, just depends on which channel you watch.
The mainstream media has gone over
Washington Newsroom, they can't stand the truth, and apparently
more and more people are watching media that affirms their own point of view.
I can't believe anything that they say. I just really can't.
I think that we need a different point of view other than the Republican and the Democratic Party.
Today, states like California lead legislation. Unelected regional committee members enforce regulations and mandates, requiring governing boards to plan communities and transportation systems to meet environmental goals, asserting where people will live and how they will commute. But planning cities and communities in the name of sound environmental policy and affordable housing has been tried before.
we should transform our decaying slum into places of decency through the landmark Model Cities program.
But after billions of dollars of federal, state, and local investment, the model cities and smart growth programs have left behind a legacy of civic corruption and urban ruin. Welcome to For the Record. I'm Lori Dew. The National Movement for Urban Planning started in 1966. President Lyndon Johnson's Model Cities program made Detroit, Michigan the face of the movement. Today, Detroit is bankrupt, yet the failed program remains an inspiration as there is a major push for regional planning and sustainable development. This is an issue with two extreme sides. So in our story tonight, you'll decide if these programs are simply a path for more responsible governing and a better environment, or if they're really the groundwork for globalization and an attack on the American dream. California's SB 375 is a bill designed to reduce the environmental impact of transportation and housing. It's known as a smart growth program.
We were tasked, legally required, to come up with a plan that would reduce greenhouse gases, ultimately, which also meant reducing vehicle miles traveled.
Mark Luce is a Napa County Commissioner and the president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. ABAG is one of the regional groups that is tasked to implement SB 375. The regional program he oversees is called PlanBayArea.
So that was the law. It also required that we meld housing and transit so that those two work together. We've really got to learn to do with what we've got. So the roads aren't going to get wider. There aren't going to be any more significant bridges. And we're just going to be doing our best to maintain what we've got. So if we're going to go from 7 million to 9 million people, we're going to have to do that by just living closer to where we work, living closer to existing transit infrastructure.
While Lou says it's smart to plan and design communities for sustainable growth, Corey says it's really about forcing people to live under closer government control.
That's what smart growth is about, is moving people out of rural and suburban areas into the city centers.
So, again, it is this vision of we're going to get people out of their cars and, we'll nudge them out of their cars. They're going to use transit.
Mark Calabria of the Cato Institute was a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
So there are lots of unintended consequences here, and it really is an attempt to try to change individual preferences. But the fact is that, Americans have demonstrated a pretty strong preference to want to live in a single-family home, to have at least some amount of a lot, and to have a car. That is part of the American dream.
American dream or not, a key to the implementation of SB 375 and PlanBayArea is the distribution of government funds for changes in infrastructure. This, while the California Public Policy Center estimates the state and local government's long-term debt is $848 billion and may soon exceed $1 trillion.
We promised or, suggested that we would find more transit dollars for those communities as an incentive to be used for planning and other things, infrastructure, to help meet those needs.
It's a war on drivers of vehicles to move people out of their vehicles and into public transportation. But of course, a lot of public transportation doesn't exist. And public transportation, trains specifically, are a way to funnel money to cronies and large mega corporations. This is a way to enrich huge mega corporations while impoverishing the general population and restricting their movement and ability to live freely.
All of the cities are going to be cookie cutter.
Mimi Steele is the president of the San Francisco Bay Citizens Alliance for Property Rights.
They're all going to have a central downtown. They're going to have some type of transit hub, which might be a bus stop or it might be a rail line or something like that. So everything is going to look the same, whether you're a very small town out in the farming communities or whether you're in downtown San Francisco.
Detroit, when I went back to like the Johnson era and say what helped cripple it, people started depending on government and public.
Larry Mongo is a small business owner who has lived his whole life in and around Detroit.
Johnson, I think, gave Mayor Gribbs this money. And from there, every mayor after that, how do we fix our problem? Go to Washington, go to Washington, go to Washington, go to Lansing. Now that Lansing and Washington put limits on that money years ago, now you see what happened. The city is decayed.
The history of central planning, both at the governmental level and at the city level, to me has been a repeated series of failures.
However, regional planners seem far less interested in the failures of the past and more focused on protecting the environment for the future.
If we want things to occur in California, all we have to do is somehow tie them to the environment. And that's what SB 375 did.
Tom Rubin has been a transit consultant for nearly 40 years. He says the primary justification for SB 375 was to reduce greenhouse emissions. The goal is to get back to the 1990 levels by the year 2020.
Guess what? We may have met it last year. We certainly will not only meet it by 2020, we will far exceed the only legal requirement in the state of California to reduce greenhouse gases.
Supporters of PlanBayArea acknowledge the goal of lower emissions is being met without redesigning entire communities, but they say the law is also about better government.
Whether it's intended or not, it may have been greenhouse gases or other things that motivated SB 375. What has resulted is in a very collaborative plan between local government and the region. Well, SB 375 really was about power.
That's absolutely the case. This is a few people have a vision of how we should all live. They know that we would not voluntarily choose to go along with that vision, and so they're using government to force that vision on us.
Much of our attention has been on California Senate Bill 375. That legislation required regional planners to hold public hearings and keep residents informed about changes to their community. But there's no mandate to put these issues on local ballots. Critics say regional planning decisions should be approved by the voters, not by appointed commissioners.
The Association of Bay Area Governments was originally started to be kind of a best practices sharing kind of a group where 9 counties and 101 cities could get together and kind of share best practices on what was working for their communities. This is the first time SB 375 said, we want you to work together on these issues. You zone for housing, you design for transit, we want you to do that together. What happens is really there were about 30 cities that were involved in the overall decision-making of the group, and then it got narrowed down dramatically to about 15 really making the majority of the decisions. All 7 to 9 million people that they're projecting would be affected by PlanBayArea had no say in whether or not they felt that they were competent to make those decisions on their behalf. It's crazy.
PlanBayArea was never placed on the ballot as a referendum, and regional commissioners refused all repeated calls to take the issue to the voters.
I just don't believe that voting on everything is the right answer. We were formed to be a republic with a little r, meaning that we elect people to make important decisions with the idea that they're going to get the information and the knowledge and the wisdom that they need to make good decisions, and that's what we do in this ABAG role.
If If there's no actual voting, then there's less of a public record. There's less accountability. It's absolutely a vision of the elite trying to force their view of the world on those who wouldn't choose it otherwise.
Like the Model Cities program in the 1960s of SB 375 and PlanBayArea say this is another attempt at manipulating society through social engineering.
From an engineer's perspective, well, yeah, that makes sense, so, yeah. And so maybe it's social engineering, but it's the good kind of engineering.
Well, good's a fairly subjective word. My process is what's good is what people voluntarily choose to do. I would say, if you've got to force something on somebody, then it's probably not good.
The vast majority of people in the Bay Area could not speak for 30 seconds on PlanBayArea. A very large percentage have no idea it exists. And that, frankly, is what keeps the planners and the proponents going. Most of the people, if they realized what was going on, would have some issues with it.
Since the 1970s, the city of Portland, Oregon has implemented a smart growth program similar to what is described in PlanBayArea. Both projects mirror objectives, namely affordable housing, less dependence on cars, and preserving the environment. Now we're going to look at sustainable development in action and how it aligns with the American dream.
Portland is the Mecca and Medina for the planners, both transportation and land use, of the smart growth variety in the U.S. and even around the world. The problem with it is that people who are advocating it really are totally ignorant of the math and the extent of the change that would be necessary, and in the opinion of many of us, really don't care. This is their dream, and they're going to pursue their dream, regardless if it turns into a nightmare.
By all accounts, the Portland project has been less than successful. Over the last 2 decades, auto use is up 58%, and transit makes up less than 3% of total passenger miles traveled annually. And the goal of affordable housing has created a market that's anything but affordable.
And what they have done is made the price of single-family housing go through the roof.
And the fact is just people like to be able to drive places. People like mobility. People want to be able to drive if they can. Of course, they're happy to take transit if it's convenient, but most of the time it isn't. It's incredibly expensive.
We didn't use Portland. I'm not even familiar with it, so it tells you how much we used it. The strategic intent is to look to the year 2040 and have a system that actually works.
Critics say this has all been tried before, and the results have been disastrous. In 1950, Detroit, Michigan was the wealthiest city in America, the Silicon Valley of the day. By the 1960s, it was supposed to illustrate the success of Lyndon Johnson's Model Cities program. On July 18, 2013, the same day PlanBayArea was approved by ABAG and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, Detroit filed for bankruptcy.
Detroit, unfortunately, back in the 60s, was the experiment for the Model Cities program, which was a federal program. And rather than help Detroit, I think it accelerated the demise of Detroit by funding money into public works projects, public housing, and developments of a sort which really didn't meet the needs of the people.
At some point, the failure of government at the local level in these areas is just going to outweigh the amenities of the reasons people want to live there. I kind of think of Detroit as, California without the beaches and sunshine. And so because California has the beaches and sunshine, they can get away with this a lot longer. But at some point, Greece has beaches and sunshine too.
Opponents of PlanBayArea have filed several lawsuits against ABAG and other associated groups. The group Bay Area Citizens has sued on the grounds that the environmentally friendly regulations set forth in the PlanBayArea program actually violate California's environmental laws. And that's our show for this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lori Dew, and we'll see you next week on For the Record.